Hello, this is Mike Manrod. I'm here with Grand Canyon Education and also adjunct faculty for GCU and co-founder and instructor at TSU. Although my views that I will represent here do not reflect any of my employers or volunteer affiliations. Also represent the Arizona Cyber Threat Response Alliance, or ACTRA, as a incident handler. Well, today we're going to be talking about something that I think is fun. I've wanted to talk about this for a long time in a more updated fashion than the last time, some of my friends and I wrote and talked about it. But we're going to be talking about the basics of building a security strategy for the SMB market. So what do we mean by SMB? Like small to medium business, all the way on up through kind of mid-market, which we all know mid-market could be big. You could consider yourself mid-market if you have 500 employees, but you might still consider yourself mid-market if you have 20 or 30,000 employees. It's a very gray area. So we're going to talk through the progression of building a security strategy and then what controls and elements you'll have starting at those most basic layers, working your way into, more and more advanced layers, of course, kind of going to the edge of enterprise, but not necessarily defining everything you need to do for enterprise. Of course, let's be clear, this won't be exhaustive for any category. So in case you want to follow other things I've worked on, there's QR codes for my Twitter and LinkedIn. Again, Mike Manrod, and thank you for joining for this video. So as we get started, the whole purpose of this is to inform, small to medium businesses, schools, government entities, the space commonly referred to as SLED, state, local education. And often this is a follow-up because I give a lot of short presentations and don't always get a chance to go into enough detail. And often people follow up and ask me, well, you had a slide on this, but could you say a little more about controls or response strategy? So this is an attempt to go at least one level deeper. A group of us are working on a training that will go much deeper, but that'll be a free online training coming soon. And then, of course, if you're in the Phoenix area or if chapters pop up other places, you can definitely partake in our free threat intelligence support unit training. But this is meant to just provide a basic overview, a getting started, and kind of a overview of how to build your security strategy. So as we move through this, who is this for? Basically, I tried to make this incremental. So we're going to start with very basic things and build on them. So if you're, in a company that has 30 employees and one IT person, and you get 15 minutes into my first slide of the most basic things you need to do, and then I lose you the next slide, that's okay. You can drop there. And if the first slide of controls are things you haven't done yet, no problem. Go do those things and then come pick up the video in a year or two, and the other things will make more sense. Flip side, if you're in the upper end of mid-market, in the enterprise space, obviously a few of the first slides will be things that are very basic that maybe you have nailed down. So feel free to fast forward. But basically, we hope this guide will provide, some useful tools and perspectives to help you along your journey. So I think the first thing we have to understand, if we're going to effectively defend, is, what's the attacker? Who is the attacker? What motivates the attacker? So it all starts with, first, before you even look at the attacker, you've got to know yourself. What is your business and risk profile? The first step to formulating a security strategy is to know your organization, and what adversaries could do to you that would be most disruptive. Are you a company that, specializes in delivering a product or service where you lose a lot of money every hour it's down? Do you journal a lot of information? And if you lose any information, that's going to be the biggest impact. Are you retail or do you sell hot dogs at baseball games? These are all different business models that are subject to different types and levels of disruption. So obviously, for some businesses, if you take an outage during the week before a baseball or football game when nobody's buying hot dogs and chips and various beverages and snow cones, well, that whole week you could be down and only lose a little bit. But then that game day, if you're down for 2 hours or even 20 minutes during that game, heck, you might have just lost a whole chunk of your revenue for that whole month. So I think the first thing is to understand your business, where your revenue comes from, who your customers are, what they rely on you for. Again, if you're a cash only hot dog stand, availability and uptime may be really important, and supply chain and be able to get your hot dogs and hamburgers, but you may not care as much about other complex topics like the ability to process transactions. On the flip side, if you're an e-commerce site, my friends in retail have vented many times about how critical it is to be able to deal with transactions effectively, on Black Friday or on Cyber Monday or on these key days where people do a huge portion of their shopping. I was recently in a cell phone store, getting an upgrade, and they were telling me about how, they were defining like what a normal day looks like, and then when, Apple or Google or Samsung come out with a new phone, their volume just skyrockets, and that's their game day. So I think we have to look at where is disruption most disruptive, if you will. And then also remember, malware isn't magic. Cyber attacks can be understood. If we really look at this, if we understand the business risk, if we understand the mechanics of how an attack works, and we apply these things and consider them together, we can build a decent risk profile. So let's look for a moment at the types of threats. Obviously, the one that's top of mind for many of us, let's face it, it's ransomware. I mean, there's a lot of things we lose sleep about, but at the end of the day, if somebody can take down your enterprise for a prolonged period of time, and then also will extort you to leak your data and sometimes even make other threats if you don't pay, that's a pretty compelling thing to be concerned about. I definitely lose sleep about it, and many of you watching this video probably also lose sleep about ransomware. So it's definitely a topic of concern for us all. Then obviously there is, you know, fraud, data theft, resource theft, all these other things that we've got to be, concerned about. So, there's definitely a lot we have to think about there. There's crypto miners. People can compromise your inboxes or your email infrastructure or even your websites and use them to compromise others, to phish people, to serve up malware. There's a reputation damage. And then obviously there's an insider threat factor. Now, I remember back in the day, I used to go to cybersecurity conferences, and it was a cliche back in the day where everybody would say, well, your biggest threat is the insider. The insider threat's what you have to worry about. Well, I will say insider threats in my modern experience are quite rare. But when they do occur, they are devastating. So obviously, we need to think of insider threat. It's a very, very real threat vector. The other thing is within the ransomware ecosystem and cybercrime and intrusion in general, there's these groups called access brokers. Access brokers are a real headache because they're really, really good at getting a foothold into your organization, and then they'll sell it to others. Well, some access brokers and some cybercrime organizations will actually go crazy and will actually buy their access. And they may even buy it from employees. So obviously, there's a real concern here of, insider threat where they're just selling their password and their MFA tokens to an adversary who will commit a secondary crime. That is definitely a topic for concern. So, like, what's the impact of cybercrime? And we'll pick ransomware for example. I mean, their city of Baltimore was down for weeks, couldn't even process real estate transactions. I mean, there's example after example, week after week. We saw the Colonial Pipeline attack where people were at runs on gas stations and prices shot up on the East Coast. And some idiot was putting gasoline in garbage bags in the trunk of their car. Whew. Boy, that's not a good idea. But widespread, there was the JBS meat packaging facility, I think down in Brazil that supplied, I think like 22% of the US, steak or meat, beef, I think it was. So obviously when they were ransomed, like that was a food supply chain concern. But let's think about your business. Like what happens if there's a ransom attack? Well, every computer hosting a website, every user workstation might go down. You might look for backups, and maybe the attacker took those out too, or they could be incomplete or out of date. All the systems people normally use to communicate are offline. So if there's a problem, usually what do? Well, we email somebody, we jump on chat, we do these routine things. Well, what happens if most of these systems are unavailable? You know, do I have everybody saved in my cell phone I need? You know, um, Maybe not. Maybe I'm just so used to being able to pull up a chat app and look up who I need, start typing their name, I have them in minutes. But what if adversaries you know, deny access to those types of resources? What is the real cost of such an incident? Now, of course, there's been tons of reports. I don't want to go through citing, whoever has the shiniest research of the day or the best spreadsheets. And I'm not sure those are always accurate anyway. I tend to view, yeah, whatever shiny number people throw of how much a breach costs you, I tend to look at those with a degree of skepticism myself. But at the end of the day, you can think about your business and think about what if you were down and unable to, complete transactions for a week? What if it was 2 weeks? What if it was four? Would you lose customers or are your customers absolutely loyal? Are there downstream impacts? Maybe your company is small to medium, but maybe you supply a critical part of a huge company that makes something society relies upon, whether it's, cars or trucks or missiles, or whether it's a supply of a certain food item or household staple. Often we're a cog in a big machine to deliver something. And if our individual entity goes down, maybe it's only worth this much to us. But as we saw with Change Health and United Healthcare, obviously they're a big fish, but the impact of unable, the medical billing apparatus not functioning properly for weeks was far more widespread than the impact of one organization. It affected pharmacies, it affected clinics. Obviously, the impact of that was quite widespread. So, let's look at the basics. You'll notice I'm a huge tea drinker for those who don't know me well yet. I'll probably even have to pause the recording and get more tea at some point in here. But the how, basic adversary tactics. I mean, there's a bad email or bad messages like phishing or malware, like a link to steal your credentials, bad software that can run on your system, and it could create a backdoor, let an attacker into your environment. It could steal and leak passwords that they use to compromise you later or sell to others. There's attacking internet facing resources like websites, systems and infrastructure exposed to the internet. So like, yeah, anytime you have a website or a software application, these involve systems that run them. Sometimes they're cloud workloads, sometimes they're like a physical computer that you manage. And then there's software installed on such systems or cloud systems, and that software could be compromised. Maybe it's out of date, maybe it has a weakness. So, and then lastly, sometimes phishing and info stealer malware flows into this bottom category, but there's attacking weak accounts, weak passwords. If there's no multi-factor authentication or there's no process to try to validate people who call in and try to get around your multi-factor authentication. Um, Compromised passwords. This is an emerging area where a lot of people are doing good work. I won't give any shout outs now, but you definitely make sure if you have multi-factor that there's processes to validate it and make sure if you have ways that you disable or provide loopholes to multi-factor. Something you'll hear about as you look at security is something called the CIA Triad. And no, that's not a building in Virginia. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And what does this mean? Well, when an adversary comes after you, they're trying to impact one or more of these. And obviously, ransomware, they get at all three. The information isn't available to you because they've messed up the integrity of it. They've encrypted it and they have the key and you don't. So they can get to your data, but you can't get to your data. And then ransomware operators use what's called double extortion. That means they get you once because you're going to buy back your data because you need it, but twice because they'll tell you, hey, if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to put it on our DLS or data leak site, a website ransomware groups have just to leak your data to the world if you don't pay the ransom. So obviously, nobody wants that to happen. And while the techniques we're going to talk about today are not guaranteed to prevent any bad outcome, you can do everything right and lose, which is proven time and time again as the world's biggest and best cybersecurity companies even are compromised by threat actors. But there's an old cliche, a story we've all heard where two people are being chased by a bear or a lion or a tiger, lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, maybe all three. And the two friends, one is about to start running and they're like, what are you doing? And the second friend's dropping down and lacing his shoelaces. And he's like, I'm just lacing up my shoelaces. And the first friend's like, are you crazy? You're going to get eaten. You have to outrun a bear. You need to get started now. He's like, I don't have to outrun a bear. I just need to outrun you. Well, I mean, that's not a very good friend and a story we've all heard, not even a great analogy, especially considering I gave you a lion, tiger, and a bear. They're going to eat, obviously, both friends. But all joking aside there, the whole idea here is that we've got a situation where adversaries are going to constantly go after lists of companies and nobody's 100% secure. But if you're not the easiest to get on the list, or in fact, if you make yourself one of the hardest to get, you're not guaranteed to not get caught, but you are less likely to get caught. So it all starts with knowing your business. What do you care the most about protecting? What do adversaries care the most about compromising? And who are those adversaries? Obviously, ransomware, cybercrime is an obvious bet, but it's not the only bet. Who else would want to compromise your organization and how? What does the worst case scenario look like? You know, if what's your worst day look like? And then if all the technology falls apart in your organization, what does recovery and business continuity look like? I'll call out only by first name. My friend Jason's done a phenomenal job at this. And if you're watching this, Jason, give me a shout out that you heard it. But he was telling me about how he's mapped out exactly how his organization that he protects will do if all the technology fails. What percentage capacity are they at? What can they still get done if all the systems are down? And then we all need to think about how quickly can we get them up? How do we communicate while they're down? So then that moves into like understanding your risk. You can create an organizational risk profile. What are you protecting against? What does the worst day look like? How would your adversaries make this worst day happen? And then what changes can you make to better prevent that from happening, detect it along the way if they're starting to make that bad day happen, and maybe even respond midway through and stop them? If they're trying to take over Nakatomi Plaza Die Hard style, maybe you've got a random cop crawling through the ventilator shafts that's going to mess up that plan. And that's really what security operations and incident response are all about. So let's move into the basics of securing your small business. This is really, if you're in a shopping mall and you look at the map and it says you are here, well, you are here. This is where you begin to start to protect your small business. And as I mentioned, we're going to start with the very basic and then build toward the more enterprise. So if we look at it, first you have to discover what is wrong. We call this vulnerability management, and it feeds into understanding risk. You can scan, you can put products out there, you can hire third parties, but ultimately you want to get an idea what is wrong. If you're at the very beginning and you have like 15 computers and you haven't ever done anything, you might even just skip this step, assume everything's wrong, and just start fixing things. Sometimes that's okay, but for everything but the most basic, you want to do a little bit of discovery and ask some good questions. Then you want to deploy security controls to stop, prevent, or block attacks. And this applies across all levels. The very most basic of, hey, we just started a small business and we have 3 computers, all the way up to large enterprises. You want tools to detect, you want tools to stop and prevent. Once you deal with stopping and preventing, there's a whole discipline and art form called detection engineering, all about detecting attacks and detecting them and figuring out when an adversary is maybe moving through your environment trying to accomplish their attack. Capabilities to respond to attacks. Well, once you figure out one is happening, you need to be able to stop the attack whenever it's possible, hopefully early. The earlier you stop it, the better. In the military, obviously, that's referred to as left of bang, right? And you'll hear people talk about shifting left. That means they're shifting their focus further to the left of where the bad thing happens, if you were to make like a chart. And that discipline is called security operations, or SOC, and incident response, or IR. Then you're going to reduce the blast radius, and you're really, like, when you fail to stop an attack, you want to contain it. So incident response also may move into some disaster recovery or business continuity. So maybe the adversary succeeded at taking down one plant of your manufacturing facility or company, or they took down one store of your retail company. But you may have hundreds or thousands of stores or plants. So you contain the blast radius, you stop the attack from spreading, and then you go into disaster recovery mode. How do you get things back online? And business continuity mode, or business continuity planning. What does the business do when the computers are down? Well, it could be for people in like manufacturing that you have an operational technology network that probably isn't down. And then you have all these Windows computers and some office space adjacent that are running into all sorts of chaos. Well, depending on the levels of isolation, maybe you should shut everything down, but maybe you don't need to. Maybe you're okay to just keep your plant isolated and running and to deal with the fact that nobody can send email. That would be an example of something that you'd build into a business continuity plan. Or maybe you have processes that can go back to pen and paper. Maybe you can go to cash only instead of taking credit cards in restaurant or retail. So then you go back to understanding and accurately reporting on what happened. This discipline is known as cyber forensics. I'll caveat that cyber forensics has a lot to it besides just responding to cybercrime, but there is a facet of cyber forensics that focuses on responding, specifically to cybercrime as its main focal area here. Um, okay, back. As promised, that was that caffeine refill break. So, starting small, if we really look at the most basic things that every company needs to do, if you've done nothing, like the first is just deploy a decent antivirus and make sure it's consistently installed everywhere and make sure it's reputable, right? Like obviously fake antivirus is actually an adversary tactic that's used. Some malware pretends to be an antivirus, telling you that it's fixing an issue. Make sure that auto updates are always on. In a large enterprise, you're going to have a patch management and distribution process. So you'll have like a beta group or a QA or lower tier environment that you push patches to, you evaluate and test them, and then you'll have a methodology to roll them to everywhere, and it'll happen in a dynamic and fast manner and hopefully with a lot of automation. But if you have a small business with a limited number of employees and you don't have a lot of IT staff, and that's not happening, just simply making sure that all of your systems are set to auto update and people know that that's a policy and that they can't not do that and they'll be in trouble if they bypass it. That's a really, really good start until you can get to the maturity level of a really robust patching and software update process. Why do we want to update software? Well, we want to update software because software products frequently end up with flaws. And think of the complexity of like, think of all the different, things that could be on a chip, right? Like a lot of complexity there. And then think of all the lines of code and all the operating systems like Windows and software we may run like Word or Outlook or PowerPoint. You look at all these things and it's like, whoa, there could be a lot of different possible interactions there. Well, all the time, security researchers, companies themselves, customers of companies, and yes, sometimes threat actors, the actual, attackers will find a new flaw with a piece of software. And they'll find a way to manipulate that flaw to get their code to run on your system. So your system, you want only the software that you want to run running on it. Like, for example, if I'm using Outlook or some other mail client, I want to be able to read my email, but I don't want it to do bad things with my email, like leak them to an attacker. Well, malware might do that, or it might leak passwords or company secrets or other things. Well, anytime a new security flaw is discovered, the software vendors hopefully are trying to fix it in a timely manner. Now, that doesn't always happen, but a lot of software vendors are good about it and do their best. But it doesn't do you any good if you're not applying those updates. So if there was a security flaw that allowed an attacker to take over your computer system that, say, came out in June of this year, if you updated that right away in June, you're probably in pretty good shape, right? Like it came out as soon as there was a fix, you fixed it. The window of opportunity where that could compromise you is smaller, not non-existent. And in fact, you'll hear the term 0 day used. All that means is you had 0 days to prepare. Like it's a very simple term. In other words, it could be a negative number of days. Like, hey, the software vendor found out about it on June 1st, but maybe the attackers were compromising it on March 1st. So, really simple concept. I think it gets overcomplicated and misused, but simply, 0 day is just the number of days that you had in terms of warning. But most major cybercrime incidents in particular aren't using 0 days. They're using well-known flaws that have been out there often for years, usually for at least months, sometimes for weeks or days. And usually there's a lot of fanfare and hoopla about those security flaws that there's very little time. So usually you'll find out about it. And if you're paying attention, you can make sure you update those faster. Like, whoa, I fired up the news, and the first thing my news app says is, hackers are exploiting, Adobe Acrobat. Well, maybe I'll go in and make sure Adobe Acrobat gets updated, you know, outside of the normal process, just a little bit faster. So, but a simple way to do that if you're a small business, make sure auto updates are always on. Then also make sure you have firewalls. Firewalls can be in front of software applications like a website that protect against website type attacks, or they can be at the edge of your network. If you have a virtual private network or a VPN where people can connect in from home and get to your network, there's security measures that you need there, like making sure they have to have good passwords, making sure they have to have multi-factor authentication. Um, but basically, you want to make sure that these things are set up correctly. And if you have firewalls, if you have websites, if you have these things and you're not sure, get a third party to help. And at the enterprise end, we need to do a lot of work to make sure our third parties are really solid. If you have a small business with 5, 10, 50 employees, you'll want to really do your diligence to make sure you're using a reputable third-party service provider. But let's be real, if you're a small business, there's only so much you can afford. And you don't want, obviously your company can fail due to a cyber attack, but it can also fail due to overspending. So there's a business balance there. And I'm actually going to provide some resources of, some podcasters and some other things you can look to get more guidance on that business balance. Make sure your password policies are in place and followed. Educate people. In more advanced, more mature shops, we should have tools that audit this. But again, in a small business, it might be a matter of telling people and just being like, hey, look, if your password is weak, if you're a bread shop and a bakery and your password is bread123 or bread in the year, and we get breached because of that, I'm not going to be happy with you, employee number 12, right? Like you got to have those conversations to make sure your employees understand that your ability to bake bread depends on their ability to pick a strong password. As we continue, that feeds well into basic security awareness. Make sure it's part of your culture, part of your organizational DNA. Classify and safeguard the information that is most important to you. Figure out like, hey, are we a retail org that processes credit cards? Well, that's pretty important. We may need to do some special things with that. Are we a medical clinic that handles healthcare information? Well, we need to safeguard and understand that information and what we're doing with it, and even what laws and responsibilities we may have. More on that later. Make sure the most important things are backed up. And lastly, multi-factor, multi-factor, multi-factor. Jen Easterly, the head of CISA, basically our top cybersecurity person for the United States on the defensive side. I can't tell you the number of times she tweets and posts to do these basic things. And it's because she's right. They're super, super important. And I'm glad she's getting the word out there. And hopefully this does a humble part to get the word out there too. So building momentum, small and medium businesses, moving towards more like the mid-market, the larger small businesses or the medium businesses. A lot of you are probably like, Mike, I've been really bored the last 5 minutes because we do all that already. Why are you boring me here? Well, okay, we'll level it up a bit. So as we move to the intermediate level, there should be some real work on email security. Now, on the small business side, there are small business email security gateways. There's built-in cloud, like if you use Gmail or O365 or some other cloud platform, there's built-in security tools that you could probably watch a YouTube video or look at the online documentation for your vendor and look through and see like, hey, what's free with the platform I'm already using? Because the answer is almost always something. And often those things are not on by default or they can be dialed in more. So, definitely do this. I'll say, my team, where I work gets hit up a lot by our own friends and neighbors who are small businesses saying, "Hey, look, I'll cook you dinner and drinks are on me if you'll just come hang out for 2 hours and look at the email settings for my small business with 5 people," right? So, don't everybody ping me because then I'll have a type of cyber incident called a denial of service where, 1,000 people ask me for help and I can't all do that in one afternoon. Of course, I'll help who I can, but we all know somebody. My buddy Jerry always says like it's all available. You can find anything you need in the circle of people you know. Well, you probably know people who can help you if you're in a small business. Advanced shops, you probably want either an enterprise security gateway. Companies that do this are companies like Mimecast, Proofpoint. Also, Microsoft and Google offer tremendous capabilities within their own platform at a premium. So be aware of, hey, do I have what comes free? Do I have what's in the background? Do I have the defaults, or should I pay a little extra to get the premium security features with the platform that we use? Also, there's a lot of bolt-on applications that you can add to your email security, your email platform that just sort of connect up and add security. I'm not going to go into those today, but there's a lot of them out there. The next is going above just antivirus. There's a product called Endpoint Detection and Response. The name's a mouthful, but really all it does is it looks deeper than just antivirus and gives you the ability, or people who work for you or service providers you hire, the ability to go look at what happened on your computer and investigate and see if something bad happened. Maybe the ability to respond and say, whoa, somebody's doing something bad on workstation ABC 123. Yeah, I got to have my Michael Jackson plug there. Let's shut it down before it spreads to all the computers. Well, EDR or MDR, which is just managed detection and response, lets you do that or helps you do that. And there's a lot of vendors out there that do that. Many of them are quite good. For those who are more on the advanced side, remember, these tools are not perfect. You can't just simply say, well, we've got an EDR or an MDR and we're good. We don't need to patch or do anything else. They're not perfect. And adversaries work very hard to find a way around these tools. But you are way better off with them than without them generally. At the intermediate level, begin to work toward network segmentation. Oh, well, we've got some computers, servers or computers that host websites facing the internet. We've got these couple computers that have all our really sensitive, important data. And then we've got like a zone where all of our employees sit and they need to get to some things, but not everything, like some systems with files on it and some internal websites. And then you might say, well, all right, and then we have a guest network. We want everybody to be able to get to that. We have guests at our restaurant, at our coffee house chains, or whatever we do. Well, segmentation is all about using firewalls and using networking devices to be able to say, hey, we're going to put these really secure things over here. We're going to make our manufacturing facility that makes widgets, that makes whatever we make and sell on a different network from our guest Wi-Fi that people connect to, that maybe they have malware on their laptop that they bring when they're touring our facility or getting a cup of coffee in our coffee house. So network segmentation is all about that process. Then now we've got a lot of things, right? Like we've got antivirus, we have email security, we have firewalls, we have EDR, we've got all this stuff. Well, we need to know when something bad is happening, both if it's stopped. Sometimes we want to know, like, hey, maybe they'll keep trying, or if it was allowed, but maybe the really bad thing hasn't happened yet. Maybe there's still time to stop the really bad day that we're trying to stop. Well, that's where you start the journey of logging, alerting, and response. And there's, logging tools. They're called a SIM, or security information and event management, or, for smaller businesses, it might just be, a managed detection and response. Don't let these terms get in the way of your success. Just know you've got to have a place where you log what's happening. A log is literally just, for those who might have been in the military, you've stood guard duty, you write down who came in and who went out. Like I had to stand guard duty in the Navy, and it's kind of annoying. That hence the Navy blue. I wear a lot of blue because of the Navy, and a lot of purple because I teach at GCU. But today it's blue and red, and one of my favorite Electronic Frontiers Foundation T-shirts. But that's maybe for another video. But the log is literally just like, hey, petty officer so and so came back at this time, but then they left again at this other time, and they didn't come back again. They're late for their morning job. That's what guard duty does. They log. Well, and then if something bad happens, they may have alert like, hey, recruit so and so just took off running with a cash register drawer that said, Navy galley on it. Well, you'd want to alert on that, and somebody would chase them down, and then they would respond. It works the same way. So a firewall, somebody tries to do something bad to a website, if it's a web application firewall, or somebody tries to use a bad password somewhere. Somebody tries to run bad software and your antivirus product picks it up. All these things could create logs, they could alert you and provide a chance for you to respond before the bad thing happens. Then we move on to consider how to respond to attacks and alerts. Again, that's security operations and incident response. We'll get to that in a moment. So as you move, in the beginning, you're deploying a lot of technologies. Then you're beginning to add a lot more processes. Like, well, I can't just buy something to respond. Maybe I need people to do that. Maybe not to begin with. Maybe you can hire it in the beginning, but at a certain maturity level, you either have to buy a lot of services, or you might want some people to do some of these things. You're going to want to consider, professional testing, scans, expert opinions on what you have exposed. You'll want to add a lot more maturity to the processes of maintaining and updating systems. And remember, don't forget about your cloud stuff. What's cloud? Well, that's when we buy like a service from Microsoft, and we don't have to like set up computers and networks to run it in our office. But Microsoft or Google or Amazon has computers and networks that they're running our software on for us, or maybe they're running everything and just giving us a platform that we use, or maybe they're just giving us the service. And that's actually a really good delineation that, I probably have in a few slides, but I love to go out of order. When we look at cloud, we look at a few layers like, hey, are we buying a platform where we're doing a lot of this stuff? Or are we buying a service, aka SaaS or software as a service? Are we buying a service and they do most of the stuff? There's actually security needed for both, but the ways you secure it are quite different and quite a bit more involved if they're giving you a platform and you're doing a lot of stuff just in their cloud versus the other. So often you'll also at this intermediate level want to expand on on MFA or multi-factor authentication. Where was it missed? Maybe you started with just the most important places like VPN and a few systems, but maybe you need to add it more places. Maybe you need conditional access. Conditional access is just a fancy word for saying, hey, we're going to look a little closer at each person signing in. And hey, does Mike usually work in Arizona? And he signed in from Arizona this morning, but then he also signed in from Eastern Europe, and those events were only 15 minutes apart. Yeah, unless Mike is Superman, and I'm not gonna like rip my jacket off and go fly. Unless I'm Superman, I can't fly to Eastern Europe and sign in from there too. There are circumstances where maybe somebody will legitimately have events or logs from two different places, but you can create rules to say, hey, if something really suspicious happens, maybe don't let this person in. Another concept we're not going to touch on here today that goes really deep into this is a great concept called zero trust architecture or ZTA, ZTNA. Great tools, great concepts, but that's more, I would say, at the advanced level. What we're giving today are foundations that if you do them all correctly, will really provide a lot of the groundwork and elements of zero trust, but not quite get you all the way there. So, as we continue to intermediate, obviously there's the journey of managing and establishing governance over powerful accounts. So we all have usernames and passwords, but some passwords are more important than others. Some passwords allow you to do things like distribute malware to every system or to lock people out of an entire cloud environment or to delete things you don't want deleted. Yeah, these are what we call privileged accounts. So Pam, I used to have a neighbor named Pam, but in this case, we mean privileged access management. And IAM sounds like the name of a dog food, but really it stands for identity and access management. So we want to have good programs to deal with how accounts are set up, how accounts are gotten rid of, say when an employee quits the company or you have a hostile employee leave and throw their badge on the door and storm out and they're really really mad. Maybe you don't want their account to still work when they leave. When they leave the pub that night upset with you, maybe they shouldn't still be able to sign in and still do things. So that's identity and access management. And privileged access management is just dealing with those powerful accounts like administrator accounts and rotating those, making sure those powerful accounts, hopefully they're auto rotating, they're safeguarded, hopefully they're strong. There's these accounts we all worry about called service accounts. These are accounts when one computer needs to talk to another computer. If those accounts are managed properly and they're really long passwords and they're stored in a vault, it's pretty good. If they're automatically rotated, even better. But if your password, again, if you're a bread, bakery that makes bread and your password is bread123 or bread in the year, and you have that for all your powerful and service accounts, those are the kinds of mistakes we hear about in the news. Don't laugh too much because if you look at your environments in the medium to enterprise space, cleaning this up may take a while. It's definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And if you're new to it and something's been messed up for a long time, sometimes it takes some time to clean up. So, you know, take one bite at a time and work your way through. Mature backup and recovery processes. So at the basic level, we talked about, hey, make sure you're backing things up. I'm talking too much about bakeries because now we're baking things up. But no, make sure you're backing things up. Make sure you have a way to recover. Make sure you're testing it. Building towards greater maturity, include elements of isolation, like make sure the attacker can't get to your backups, hopefully on the same network with the same password that they already have at the point they're about to ransom you. That doesn't do much good. And then there's a concept at the more advanced level of immutability. Basic immutability is maybe you run backups on tapes and you send them to a third party like an Iron Mountain, or I don't know who their competitors are, but there's others. You send it off and it's safe. Like the problem is that process has probably quite a bit of delay. If you mailed it off and everything in your building's gone, you might have lost some data. Better than losing all the data, but how much data can you tolerate to lose? This becomes one of those risk, know your business types of trade-off. For some organizations, they can't tolerate losing minutes of data, and it's worth spending millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions not to lose even, say, hours of data. But again, in the mid-market space, usually there's some sort of trade-off. But immutability just basically means that the attacker can't destroy your backups. There's a lot of solutions out there that allow for cloud immutability and rapid recovery. So you have backups that are, on-prem, meaning they're where you are, but then there's other backups in the cloud that can't be deleted easily or at all from on-prem. Governance and risk at this intermediate level should begin to emerge as a priority. So a story I like to tell is imagine you're throwing a Super Bowl party and you have somebody coming to that party who is allergic to bees. So, you're worried that they're allergic to bees and you're going to be a good host and it's an outdoor Super Bowl party. So you implement some security controls to protect against bees. Maybe you put up netting, maybe you even have some response procedures where you have fly swatters and you hire a couple of the neighbor kids to come over and hey, if a bee shows up, shoo them off with these fly swatters, or this hose. So you've got all these things, and those are security controls and response procedures. But now, let's pick an imaginary name, Melvin, because I don't know anybody actually named Melvin. And Melvin shows up with a cooler, and you think it's full of like refreshments, or Melvin brought some food to the party. But Melvin's a troublemaker. Melvin walks into the middle of the party, and you're like, this is weird. Why is Melvin in a bee tending suit? This can't be good. And Melvin's an invited guest, but Melvin opens up the cooler, pulls out a beehive, and spikes it at the ground in the middle of the party. How effective is your bee netting and your fly swatters and your recruited neighbors going to be against that threat? Not very effective. Won't be very effective at all. So governance and risk, in GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance, is the art form of making sure that your business operates with risk in mind, that you have some screening over what vendors that you bring in, what products you use. If you develop software, what dependencies, what do you reuse in the software you make? What types of projects do you take on and how risky are they? A good governance and risk process should hopefully stop Melvin from spiking a beehive into the middle of your Super Bowl party. Let's at least hope so. So now we're going to move to layer in some more advanced controls. Now, I'll pause here for a second and say, if you're in the smaller end of small to medium business, you're like, whoa, I've already got enough to keep me busy for the next 2 years. You can drop and stop listening to this video. And if you've been like fast forwarding to get to the more interesting parts for like, all right, I know all this already. Maybe this is where you stop fast forwarding. This is where we're going to get to some more advanced controls. So detection and segmentation. As we get deeper into this art form of detection engineering and SOC and IR, you know, logging and detection engineering will take center stage. And it'll be fed by more advanced log sources, such as network detection that detects traffic within and across network zones, because by now, hopefully, there's some level of segmentation. So network detection and response, or NDR, intrusion detection and response, or IDS, are technologies that will monitor, and there's even asset tracking technologies as well that will monitor and say, hey, what systems do we have in what zones? Who are they talking to? What are they doing? What does an attack look like? There's open source technologies, there's closed source technologies, there's a lot of popular things you can buy and implement there. There's deception technologies. The way these work is to say, hey, we're going to put user accounts and credentials out there. We're going to put systems, we're going to put websites, we're going to put Active Directory domains. We could do a whole series on domain security, but we don't go that deep on this one. Just if you do have an Active Directory domain or an Azure Active Directory, aka Entra domain, make sure you get an expert to help you secure it properly if you don't have an expert on your team or in your company. But deception technologies, I digress. So basically, are technologies that you put in an appliance, you deploy some software, and it makes all sorts of things look exactly like a weak target or a honeypot to the attacker, so that when they move in, instead of going for maybe a moderately weak thing, they go for the very weak thing and alert you in the process. So you figure out maybe days sooner or hours sooner that somebody's attacking you and they're on the inside and about to eat your lunch, about to ransom your stuff because, hey, guess what? Your deception technology figured it out. And same deal, there's open source and closed source. The one thing about deception technologies is do it correctly, because if you put something intentionally vulnerable in your environment and do it wrong, it might just be the blunt object that the adversary bludgeons you with, right? It may not help you to have a deception technology that you do yourself if you're not really, really good at doing it securely. I like to think of users. A lot of people say users are the weakest link. Users are the problem. Well, sometimes users can be a problem, and obviously adversaries attack people. With spam, with phishing, with vulnerable poisoned websites, with poisoned search results. But humans also can report things that our technology products miss. So if you do good security awareness and you have what's called an abuse mailbox, which is just a mailbox that you promote and advertise internally that says, hey, if you see a phishing email, if you see something suspicious, or if you're even debating like, hey, do I open this attachment that's says it's dodgy.pdf? Obviously, that won't be the real file name. Maybe I should ask first. Well, this is the ask first mailbox, and it might be like security@company.com. And everybody knows that that's the place that you email. Well, then if somebody sends a bad message to 1,000 of your users, and Sally, who's super diligent, aware, and on top of things, and also starts at 5 a.m., notices that message at 5:01 a.m., you might be able to not only deal with it when only one or two people have clicked the link or opened the bad attachment, or nobody even maybe, but you can pull back all of the bad messages that were delivered to everybody else. Really, really great way to do it. Then there's advanced networking topics, obviously, such as application ring fencing, microsegmentation. Again, not to get into buzzword bingo, but application ring fencing is where you use usually software running on your servers, on your hosts, on your computers, or on your hypervisors, or in your cloud environment that says, hey, we know all of these are our CRM system or our accounting system or our enterprise resource planning or ERP system. We're going to build a wall in software around that in an automated way without you having to do much, right? Like, it suggests a rule, you implement that rule, and if done correctly, it works. Tip if you ever do application ring fencing or micro segmentation, you need some global rules that define things that happen all the time, above like each individual bucket. That'll make sense when you do it if it doesn't now. And if I get comments or feedback and you want a video on application ring fencing and micro segmentation, put that in the YouTube comments or on Twitter, tag me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And my buddy Cameron and I will get together and we'll make a video on just that. But attackers need and want to move throughout your environment usually to find the sensitive data, to get the reach they need to deploy the ransomware. If you've segmented well, that'll be hard. Also, an Italian economist named Alfredo Pareto actually put out there a theory called the 80-20 rule. And when he put this out, he noticed that 80% of the wealth in Italy back like a century plus ago was controlled by 20% of the people. Now, I think most of us would call that utopian today. The ratios aren't quite as good right now. And maybe they weren't even then. Maybe his math was wrong. But it's similar to when attackers try to exploit a service. Services that attackers can exploit run on what's called ports. These are just like virtual places that your computer can listen. Think of it like radio stations. Like, if you're old like me and you had the old dial TV, you turn the TV to each dial, and each dial is a different station. Well, a network port on your computer is like those stations, except your computer has 65,000 stations. Well, each station will allow different things. Like some will allow a website, some will allow remote traffic, some will allow file sharing. Well, out of like when you look at attacks and compromise and malware, out of all 65,000 ports, most malware and malicious activity and lateral movement involves just a handful of these ports. Like, 20 or 30 of them are the most common. And of those, like 5 or 6 of them are, the way most common. So these advanced, if you don't have to get everything networked correctly, everything protected correctly, although that's good. If you just even start dealing with host firewalling, using firewalls to control the highest risk, most dangerous ports, or like, again, they're like TV channels for computers for communication, you are going to be in much, much better shape. All right, now if I tell my kids that I had to pause recording twice because I got tired of talking, they're going to be like, no way, Dad. Like, you talk nonstop. There's no way you had to pause twice to get, more tea and, take a break and, just recording an overview of some basic security conference or topics. So I think we've kind of covered the networking piece. Again, just think of it like TV channels, and just like some TV channels you may not want to let your kids watch. Again, not many people, not everybody will relate to the dial, but we all relate to TV channels, and some that are okay and some that are not, and some that may even be in a language you don't understand, depending on where you are. All those different factors, that's exactly how it is on computers. So I think all of these concepts can be made simple. We also have to remember that in the cloud, we've got to think about security too. I think a lot of there was a big push for years of put everything in the cloud. It'll be fine there. It'll be safe there. Well, the first thing to think about that I think causes a lot of confusion, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, is that there's different types of clouds. There's software as a service, which is pretty much they provide all of the infrastructure, the software, the whole thing, and you use it within their parameters. But there is still a lot of security related stuff you can and should do. And then there's infrastructure as a service or platform as a service where they give you some aspects of it and it varies provider by provider, but you're responsible for configuring a whole lot of it. And you can make mistakes like, hey, your data bucket or your database that has all your customer data is open, internet facing, and unauthenticated, and anybody on the internet can find it and get it. And like it's frequently referred to in Amazon as an open S3 bucket. There are so many data breaches that have occurred due to just open S3 buckets because somebody made a mistake. And you might think, wow, like they must have really been bad at what they were doing. No, not really. It's unfortunately a lot of cloud providers have made it way too easy to make mistakes. If anybody has ever seen the Aliens versus Monsters movie, a great comedy and kids movie, there's a lot of interactions with their fictitious president in very sitcomish, funny interactions where there's two red buttons on a wall. One will make the president a cappuccino, and the other launches all the nuclear missiles. Well, obviously, the president in Monsters versus Aliens keeps going to get a cup of coffee, and the Joint Chiefs and everybody's there and keeps almost hitting the wrong red button because they're the same size and shape. Well, a lot of our cloud configuration is about that easy to mess up. It's like the two red buttons next to each other, and one fires the nuclear missiles and the other makes the cappuccino. So it's quite difficult. And if you're configuring stuff, particularly on the infrastructure or platform as a service side, if you don't know what you're doing, get help, involve consultants, contact your vendor for help. A lot of them have if you're deploying through Amazon or Microsoft or Google, many of them even have, some free outreach and options to help you make sure you do it correctly. But you have to take advantage of these things. If you're doing infrastructure security, there's something called Cloud Security Posture Management or CSPM. And then there's also a complex topic, which is there's you have to deal with securing both the cloud or the computer that you present software on and the software itself. So you can deliver a perfectly secure platform. You can't, that's impossible. But hypothetically, you could maybe deliver a very, very secure platform. But if the software that runs on it is badly coded and insecure, you could have a data breach or a compromise, or an adversary could use it to get into your accounts, your environment, your systems. The flip side is you could have a very, very well secured, perfectly coded application. Again, perfect is impossible, but let's say it's really good, and then you deploy it on a container, a server, a cloud workload that's insecure, properly set up, running compromised or weak accounts. Again, the adversary will get in. They owned the system, and the system's running your application. So guess what? It's compromised. So there's a whole interconnection between the tools that help you to secure the cloud or the servers and the tools that help you to deliver secure software services on those tools, which we'll get to the second piece of that in a moment. Security measures for SaaS products or software as a service are quite a bit simpler. Many SaaS products have built-in security capabilities, but there's a lot of them, so it becomes complicated to manage them across many products. Prioritization here is helpful. Not all of your software as a service products are equally important. So especially in this SMB and mid-market space, if you have 100 SaaS products and they've never been governed or managed or secured, don't try to do all 100 tomorrow. Prioritize them. Figure out what the 5 or 10 most important are, or even start with the 2 or 3 most important and get those right. And again, back to Alfredo Pareto, you know, you can eliminate a large chunk of your risk by fixing a small number of things. Uh, that's not enough, but it's a good start. Um, CSPM will tell you, or Cloud Security Posture Management will tell you what's going on. But then you need to do the same things you do right everywhere else, except in the cloud. Oh, and by the way, doing it in the cloud is a little bit different, and it varies cloud by cloud. You have to have secure configurations. You have to deal properly with identities and secrets. You have to deal correctly with networks and network security. You have to deal with monitoring, logging, and response. And you have to deploy security tools ranging from firewalls, sometimes antivirus, sometimes a variety of different security products and solutions, depending on exactly what you're doing. If you're beginning to look at your clock and you're like, whoa, this is a lot of content we're going through, don't worry, we're in the homeward stretch. We're wrapping up here soon. Um, you know, Protecting hosts, workstations, and servers is another discipline as you bridge from intermediate into advanced or skilled. Usually, obviously, you'll have next-gen antivirus, you'll have EDR, MDR, which we've already talked about. Hopefully, your network side is secure, host firewalling, but you'll also want to look at what websites are users going to. If an email had a bad link, you want to always be able to answer on network or off, regardless of device type, anywhere that user could have gotten to that email. Did they click it? Did they go to it? Did they put in a password? Did they download or run the malware? So that's like the host URL filtering. There's also products called Secure Web Gateway. Another thing in this space that's helpful is something emerging known as enterprise browser. There's also browser isolation browsers. Next, there's application control, which there's free options for this, like App Locker is built into Windows, but it's a pain to manage. So there's application control is built within many antivirus products. It's also available in standalone products. And then lastly, there's vulnerability management, reporting, logging, and even host remediation capabilities that can exist within a host. A lot of these things might be done at like an individual host level, via products, or a lot of it could be completely open source. One other thing to think of there is that servers, cloud VMs, servers being computers that serve up websites and various different enterprise software, and say cloud VMs, servers in the cloud versus user workstations have different problems and situations, and thus often need different focal points, right? Like micro-segmentation might be how you handle your network side along with, traditional segmentation in your data center. But you probably don't need all those expensive features on your user workstation. You might not, but you definitely need host firewalling. So those might be different products. Hopefully, people aren't browsing the internet from your servers, and if they are, you have a bigger problem. Also, your servers should all hopefully be behind a powerful next generation firewall. So what that means is you probably don't need to run a very resource intensive URL filtering or secure web gateway product on the servers, but you probably may need a micro-segmentation agent, and you may not need your micro-segmentation agent on your regular user workstations. You could probably, do just fine with a regular host firewall if you have, good tools to manage it. So this is a lot. At this point, if you're new in your journey and you hung in it this far, one, congratulations. I expect the YouTube views this late in the video to be like 5. Not that I'll look, but who knows, maybe I will because I said that now. But if you made it this far, thanks for hanging in there. We've covered a lot quickly, and I'm always under caffeinated and sleep deprived, and it's late for me here as I work on this. So thanks for hanging in there. But um, there's a lot here. And talking about it is a lot, listening to it a lot is a lot, doing it is even more. But don't worry, make a plan. That's why these are in phases. Work your way through the phases, even if you're a big enterprise. You may look at the first slide and you're like, oh, we're a big enterprise, but we're not so good on bullet 3. So, okay, start there. And then build this into a phased roadmap, a plan, a strategy that lets you iterate toward greater and greater levels of resiliency and security. You don't have to do it all at once, but you should prioritize the most important things first. So once you have the controls in place, they're all going to be telling you all these bad things going on because everybody is getting attacked all the time. Okay, if you have 3 employees, they only have laptops, you've controlled what software they're running, and there's no website. Okay, maybe not, but for the most part, there's going to be a lot happening once you get the right level of visibility. So we've talked about this a little bit already, but SOC and IR, we'll define those a bit. So the role of a security operations center or SOC is to identify and triage the flow of logs, alerts, and incoming attacks. In a mature enterprise environment with all the tools we've talked about, lots of things are going off all the time. But some of them will be researched, investigated, and determined to be not bad or not malicious, aka a false positive. Some things will be determined to be, low priority but frequent. Like, okay, yeah, we always get these alerts, but it's from the customer, student, guest network or whatever, so they're not as high a priority. And then they'll also define like, whoa, when this happens, this is consistent with a real attack. And we want to escalate it right away and get everybody involved to respond before we all walk into a ransom note or all the data walks out or whatever bad thing happens. So that's the role of incident response. So the Security Operations Center or SOC does triage, they do initial response, they monitor, they alert. Often they do a lot of detection engineering, coming up with that perfect set of rules to pick out the bad thing that could be a needle in a haystack. And ideally, in a mature org, there will be purple teaming or continuous assessment and testing, where basically the team is trying to hack themselves, looking at what it looks like, and then writing rules and detections to pick up their own attempted hacks of themselves. Incident response is often, it could be a team, but often it's a hybrid of more senior people, engineers, leaders, senior SOC analysts, that all come together when a problem's identified. Now, the role of IR is to come together to contain the attack, to minimize the blast radius, to stop the adversary. It's very much reactive to stop the worst day from happening. Forensics uses some of the same disciplines, tools, technologies, and approaches as SOC and IR, but it's very much with the lens of determining what happened and reporting on it accurately, and when needed, in a way where it will stand up in court. So it's a very specialized discipline. A lot of the mid-market will not have a forensics capability in-house. If you get to the phase of, I'd say at an early maturity level, none of these will be in-house. It'll be all outsourced. A mature mid-market org may have an in-house SOC or a hybrid with a service provider and some in-house people supporting that service provider, and may have some both inside and outside IR, but it's usually a pretty advanced shop that will have in-house forensics capabilities. Sometimes those capabilities do evolve over time as an offshoot out of a really good internal IR program or SOC. Building towards in-house capabilities, a service provider or MSSP is almost always the way to go at the very beginning or entry level. If you have 50 employees, you don't want to hire 10 employees just to run your security team, unless you're a security company, then it may make sense, or a .com startup, software firm. But in general, you'd be in a MSSP or managed security service provider in that case. Only select quality MSSPs for security services. There was an incident on the 4th of July weekend about two years ago, maybe it's 3 now, where a vendor called Kaseya they were a managed service provider. Actually, they had a product called the Kaseya VSA, which was a remote admin tool that was used by many small managed service providers. And a lot of these service providers weren't super mature. Well, this tool was used to deploy ransomware to over 1,000 companies in one holiday weekend. Devastating impact. At the time, one of the biggest ransomware attacks of all time. They asked for 70 million, I think, which I don't think got paid. While Kaseya should have probably done some things differently along that journey, one thing they definitely did right is they looped in law enforcement right away, and law enforcement was able to facilitate some pretty favorable outcomes. But that's another story entirely. If you do use an MSSP, use a quality one, have clear lines of escalation and communication, and response plans that clearly delineate how the service provider escalates to your company, how you deal with those escalations, and make sure you have competent people in-house or even other service providers that are activated when your service provider, like your SOC, MSSP, says something bad is happening. Make those internal and external roles and responsibilities clear and well-defined. Next, you want to have a culture of security awareness. You want to start with creating a culture of security with security awareness training that happens at least annually. If you have a new hire training or orientation, you want to throw a few security slides in there and talk about security. You want to send out memo or awareness emails. Sometimes we make these fun, like we'll rewrite a song, except all the lyrics are a security message, or we'll do something fun and goofy, a poem. This stuff is much easier with ChatGPT and AI products. Talk about security awareness in staff meetings, roadshow. Go talk to your people and make sure they're making security a priority. Once I saw an executive during a campaign run around the C-suite telling everybody who walked by, don't click on things, don't click on things, don't click on things. Maybe he'll watch this and text me, but that's the kind of leadership that boy, like you can be proud of. And when that's the message coming from the top levels, you have an org where you may win, you may lose, but at least everybody cares. Building momentum toward the more advanced. Send your own internal simulated phishing email messages. Vendors like Proofpoint and KnowBe4 make this easy. There's also open source frameworks like GoFish or the social engineering toolkit that help with this. My voice is definitely wearing thin. I don't usually talk this long nonstop. Um, you can move on to bait USBs, like USBs that are set not with real malware, but to alert you if they're plugged in. QR codes that you log if people go to the website. Social engineering tests structure these carefully, define ethics, make sure everything is legal, above board, and in general, get the opinion of HR and legal on these kinds of things before you do them, especially if you're new to it. Keep it positive. Encourage reporting to the abuse mailbox. Contests are always a hit. Additional considerations if you develop software. CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration, continuous delivery. These are pipelines that you can set up with toll gates for quality, for inspection, for change control, for scanning. Make sure they're secure, make sure they're mature. Have a good change control process, or like a change approval board or whatever it's called in your company. Make sure before code is released or before big changes are made to production, there's a group of people who has to review and approve it and document and maintain documentation of these things. Infrastructure as code, cloud, DevSecOps. There's this whole mature paradigm of looking at the application and the infrastructure it deploys on together as one thing that hopefully are deployed as a secure unit. Scanning, there's a lot of different kinds of scanning. There's dynamic web scanning, there's static code analysis, there's manual testing, unit testing, QA testing. Obviously, there's outside pen testing and audits. And then lastly, there's the ongoing process of training, developers and development managers and how to develop secure things and creating a culture that believes in secure by design. Helpful frameworks along the way. If you want to understand the attack lifecycle, look at the Lockheed Martin kill chain for the basic level. MITRE ATT&CK is phenomenal. Definitely Google that. I can put links to all these resources in the comments if desired. Frameworks for how to defend. CIS is high level and provides some basic guidelines, as well as the CMM or cyber maturity model. There's also the NIST cybersecurity framework and ISO 27001 that you can rely on. Each of these topics could sort of get their own video, but you can definitely Google or ChatGPT or Google Gemini these things and get enough information to get you started. Lastly, as we integrate all this data together, iterate, improve, do external testing when you can, do self-assessment constantly as much as you can, do tabletop exercises, and use the inputs from your real attacks and your exercises to adjust your strategy and hopefully revisit your strategy and rethink things, at least quarterly. And then finally, and I know I keep saying finally, compliance can be a driver sometimes of security. Look at, hey, what is it that we need to comply with? And sometimes you can align that to your security roadmap, two birds with one stone, and get more secure and more compliant. Remember, compliant does not equal secure, but compliance can help you drive security. So do you process credit cards? Do you have healthcare information? I know we touched on this earlier. What state or local laws do you have to deal with? Well, if you operate in many states, that could be a lot. If you operate in Europe, there's the GDPR. If you're critical infrastructure, CIRCIA, or the Act for critical infrastructure and reporting of incidents to CISA or the federal government may apply. Um, and you may ask, like, why do you put so many dogs in conference rooms? I mean, I love dogs and I love conference rooms. So what can I say? In conclusion, if this seems like a lot, it is. Don't let it overwhelm you. It is a journey. You won't do it all at once, even if you try. It's probably impossible. This is not even close to exhaustive, and this is just my opinion and the input of a few friends that I ran this by, which too many people to thank. So just a general thanks to all the people and organizations who've helped me to learn and who've contributed directly and indirectly. Um, really, hopefully, where you are is the perfect place to start your journey. If you're advanced and you've made it this far, wow, my hat's off to you. You have a good, strong attention span, and you hung in there. So good for you. But if you're a beginner, where you are, wherever you are in that continuum, is the perfect place to start. Here's some helpful resources. I will cross-post those to the chat. The ChatGPT SMB Virtual CISO is a great resource created by my friend Christian Talon. Funny story, that one started as like a late night rant, a late night like tonight, of me throwing out there in a Teams chat with like 30, 40 people in there, like, somebody could give, a whole lot of what a CISO does is just answering repeatable questions. Like, somebody could create an AI that does it better than I do. Well, built on top of ChatGPT, Christian did. It consistently gives better answers than I do. There's a project that is empty at the moment, but by the time you watch this, it might not be, at my GitHub, called CISO in a Box. So my GitHub is Crude Solutions. This project, CISO in a Box, um, will eventually be built out with hopefully all the tools and techniques and templates you need to build a security program successfully. That's the goal, for it to have everything you need and to be all encompassing. Can I do that? Am I knowledgeable enough to do that? Not even close. We all have specializations and niches. However, I hope to get a large community of people working on that project. And are all of us together smart enough to put together a CISO in a box project? Absolutely, we are. Me individually, no. But I'm not going to do it individually. Then a kind of a Twitter buddy, I'll say, accidental CISO, who also launched the Mindful Business Security podcast, puts out a lot of really great stuff catered toward the mid market. So definitely shout out to accidental CISO. He's also pretty funny. Cracks some good jokes on Twitter. And then my buddy Fern launched a podcast called In the Thick of It. What I love about In the Thick of It is he does long interviews and short snippets of security leaders who, a lot of the people that are just iconic and that I look up to, including like my buddy Kim Jones, who's been in this industry. He's been a CISO for, since I was like, traveling around on Navy ships doing nothing to do with security. And people like Rich Owen, another great friend and tremendous security leader who literally wrote the NASA, the pink book. I won't steal his thunder on that story. Go check out Rich Owen, but he wrote the NASA cybersecurity guide published in 1990. And I had the privilege of looking at it, and it's good. Like, it's still valid today from 1990. He wrote that, and you can go listen to him, on a long form podcast on In the Thick of It. So go check it out. Again, my buddy Fern put that together. He's a phenomenal interviewer, and he creates a fun, chill vibe. You'd have a much higher recording quality of this video if I would have asked Fern to record this, but I wanted to get something out there quick while the ideas were fresh. So you'll have to tolerate my grainy video, frequent pauses, and zero editing. So again, if you've made it this far, thank you so much. Obviously, nobody's able to bang on my door after midnight and ask me questions here, but hit me up on social media. I do not answer social media private message very often. I get like hundreds of sales PMs a week and I can't keep on top of it. So just tag me publicly if you have a question. Just tweet and tag me on Twitter as Crude Solutions or tag me on a post on LinkedIn asking me for something. And that I'll see and I'll get to, or just reach out to me any other number of ways. Thank you so much. It's been fun and hope to engage with you online. Have a great night.